This is your brother Farouk Hunter with the Freedom Nation. Today we're going to talk about the top 3 stories that matter to those of us trying to build black power and black self-determination throughout the world. Let's get started. Now, relevant to our top 3 stories is a little topic that some of us know a little more about, a little less about, and if you haven't heard of it, you need to become acquainted with it. It's called the New Migration. Now, the New Migration is a second migration of African American, Black American, however you want to categorize us, those of color in the United States with our unique experience that have traveled from the one place in the United States to another place in the United States. In the early eras after slavery, there was a mass migration of African Americans to the North for various reasons, finding jobs, getting away from certain levels of oppression, so forth and so on. What's important to state that since the 1970s, African Americans have found more significance in traveling south than traveling north. At this point, we are now seeing the consolidation of massive African American populations in the southeastern United States. Now, in some states, it matters. In some states, it doesn't. For example, if you look at Georgia, for instance, or should I say, if you look at Florida, like Florida has a massive population, almost 3.7, almost 4 million African Americans living in Florida. However, the non-African American population, or the white population, let's just be direct, say it like the U.S. Census does, is so massive that it outnumbers them and their percentage profile is still low. However, in the case of a place like Mississippi or in Alabama or Louisiana, it actually has a much higher impact. And there's no place in the United States that has a higher amount of African Americans that make up a larger amount of the population and the voting population than the state of Georgia. I want you to really think about that. Almost 4 million African Americans, according to the U.S. Census, which we know for a fact is skewed heavily because the census does not spend enough time going into black communities in those places. But even with that skew, it's undeniable. Just like the vote for Trump, when they tried to change it and flip it over, they just couldn't argue it. Georgia has flipped for black people. Now, in recent years, we've seen the impact of that. We've seen it inside different of the gubernatorial races. We also see it in the growth of other spaces, like, for example, diversity rise in Georgia, with whites making up only half the state, reported by the New York Times, almost in 2021. We saw the impact of that when we saw that black Americans actually flipped the vote in Georgia towards Biden. I'm not backing up Biden. I'm just saying that we did it inside of the favor of the Democrats. I think our idea was more to get Trump out of the place than anything else. And even so, what's more unique about Georgia is that Georgia has actually become a place not just for African Americans to trend to, but even black immigrants from Africa, let's just say it as it is, are coming into Georgia en masse. Almost 165% growth of the African community in Georgia and that's higher than anywhere else in the entire United States. Georgia is sizing up by whatever means that are actually happening to be the black Mecca of the United States of America. It's one of the reasons why the Freedom Nation is in Georgia. It's why we put the Freedom Village in Georgia. It's why we focus our attention on building Georgia as a powerhouse for black power. Pun on words. It was good though. So the other thing, of course, that's happening in Georgia, and this is where we should pay attention, is redistricting. Now, redistricting has always been something or a tool that has been used by white people in order to skew the votes democratically in their favor. What happens is black people consolidate typically too much. It's good to consolidate to a state, but when voting regions are separated out in such a way where you have to vote, now the gubernatorial race might be impacted, but the House of Representatives at the state level, the state and the Senate, and the House of Representatives and the Senate inside of the federal level are impacted by different regions and voting districts throughout the entire state. And by redistricting, they chop into a little bit of the black place and then look for the white population to overpower inside those districts. It's been a way for white people to stay in power and political power for a very long time. And it's trying to happen in Georgia. I mean, the only way to stop this from happening in Georgia is to control the House of Representatives, to control the Senate, and most importantly, to control the gubernatorial position or the seat of the governor and lieutenant governor. Up until now, we've seen some really horrible things done. Stacey Abrams ran against Kemp inside of the last gubernatorial race, and he actually resigned as Secretary of State, placed his own person in place, someone that was loyal to him, and then decided to manipulate the vote in order to take the gubernatorial race. Now, we're at the Voice of Freedom. We say what we know is true, and that is true because we know about the buses of African American voters that were turned away, that literally the votes. I mean, there was literally a case Stacey Abrams brought up too late, where almost 50,000 votes were just picked up and threw away from the desk of the Secretary of State. So there's been massive manipulation from that single office in the Secretary of State to make sure that this black voting majority does not get to vote in its power base into the gubernatorial seat. That, and one of our major stories for the day, is about to change. And the way that it's about to change is we've got a wonderful guy, John Eves. John Eves is actually an amazing individual. A little bit about John Eves is that John Eves was the head commissioner for Fulton County for years. And I have met the brother before. I have talked with him. He is a very good brother when it comes to having a level head, a sense of morality, and an understanding about the necessity in order to create a balanced space. And I'm going to say balanced space. I'm not going to put on him that he's leaning one way or the other, but he understands that the politics of a space is determined by the population majority of that space because we claim to be a democratic society. So to see John Eves in the lead and favored for the Secretary of State position is extremely good news. It'll be one of the first times in history that an African American with a solid history of doing things that are even space, that are look out for the majority of the people, that actually trends towards helping the people, will take that seat that controls the vote of the governor, the vote of the president, and the vote of everything else. And now, it doesn't stop redistricting, but what it does stop is the manipulation of the vote and the manipulation of the basic rules that come from that office on basically what is accepted, what's not accepted when it comes to the vote, and so forth and so on. This is definitely news worth watching. You know, on our site now, we're actually monitoring the Stacey Abrams, and we're also monitoring Kwanzaa Hall running for lieutenant governor and governor respectively. And this is something that we definitely want to keep our eyes on because the governor's seat and these key seats in the state, they determine laws, they determine all of the functions that work underneath them. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation, the State Patrol, and the orders that are passed down to them. So basically, when you ride on those highways, when you go through those byways, when people pick up a case that is irrelevant to criminality and decides whether they do it or not, the discipline of the police forces inside the state and everything else. One thing to be said is that a lot of times as Americans, we don't realize that the highest seat in the nation, the highest seat is not the president. The highest seat in the nation is the governor of whatever state you live in, because it is at the state level that they accept federal laws. While focused on the presidential race, all the things that are created, all the laws have to be accepted by the state, and the governor controls that. And that is something really important to watch about the establishment of Black Power. I am not trying to say that these individuals are holistically focused on Black Power. I'm not putting that to their favor for good or bad, but I am saying that we have a lot better time reaching them, talking with them, communicating them for things of our favor to create a peaceful life than we do with the current people that are in place. And that's something to watch. Now, on the way in, of this, there's another law being passed, and this is another big piece of news. There's another law being passed in Georgia that is actually to the favor of any African American that believes in their ability to protect themselves. Up until this point, in any city or state that allows for you to carry weapons, you've had to get a permit. And that permit is typically denied to someone who has been in prison, even for some of the smallest things. So a person goes for a crime, we already know that there's a disproportionate amount of African Americans inside of the penitentiary system of the United States. That means especially strong men that would otherwise utilize a weapon to protect their daughters and their wives, or even strong women who would use a weapon to protect themselves against people who do things like happened in Charleston, or like the little white guy that went down to Charleston, shot up the church. Having someone in place to be able to stop them. If that person has ever been a victim of systematic racism and placed inside the penal system unwillingly, then he cannot carry a weapon. He's left to deal with attacks that come from radical individuals, radicalized, I love to use this term, radicalized white individuals who have it in their mind to destroy every sense and concept of diversity in the United States, and have proven themselves to be an absolutely terroristic movement. Let's use those terms. That's right. It shouldn't be attributed to us guys who are just Muslim. That's not unfair. African American Muslims have never shot up anything. We're not terrorists inside our country, but radicalized white people definitely are. And the ability for a white person to become radicalized with a weapon is much higher than anything else we've ever seen as a threat to violence in our country. And the idea that Democrats are actually opposed to this law is ludicrous to me. This is why I don't take sides Democratic. I'm sorry, it swings too much. There are some things that are done by the other side that actually benefit us, and this is one of them. This is called the Constitutional Act for Guns and Permitting Weapons Carrying inside the state of Georgia. Now, the state of Georgia right now, I had a wonderful experience to go down and buy a gun in the state of Georgia. I asked the guy at the gun club, I said, look, what's the limit? How many guns can we buy? He said, how many can you carry out the door? Right? So there's always been a very liberal gun law in the state of Georgia. And in a place like Hancock County, where Freedom Village is, where we're building this black town, we're in the process of opening up a gun range. And we are trying to dedicate that gun range to some of the awesome groups that are dedicated to protecting African Americans, especially those who showed up for our brother Ahmaud Arbery after he was wrongfully murdered, and demanded the arrest and the seizure of the individuals who were responsible for that slaying. So we definitely want to create a space for them. Inside of that space, there's no noise ordinance in a place like Hancock County. You can go out there and unload some of the most amazing rounds into the dirt and then practice how to shoot and protect yourself. And now in the state of Georgia, if you have been a criminal by the definition that has been placed in front of us, otherwise maybe not a criminal, you now, after this law is passed, can carry a weapon. That's unique. That's very unique. Now, I'm not promoting that we go and do crazy things, but having the ability to protect ourselves, as long as people who hate us can carry a weapon, then we need to be able to carry a weapon. Defense has to be met equally with the threat that we are defending ourselves against. And that is something that is happening in Georgia that's rarely happening in any other place in the country. And Governor Kemp is actually standing behind it very strongly and signing it. So we'd like for him to stay in office long enough to sign the bill, and then, sir, we'd like to see you gone. Second to that, and really attached to that, I would like to cover one more piece of news that's out there. And this one came up as police officials are being sued now. And let's be clear exactly where this happening. This is in Maryland. In Maryland, where a black police officer reported that he had constantly overheard white police officers talking about ways to slaughter and kill protesters during what is now titled the Black Lives Matter protests a couple of years back. I don't like that title because most of the people out there do not share the views of the organization Black Lives Matter. They share the concept of the mantra Black Lives Matter. So I like to make it clear that, in my opinion, it was more about us getting out there and talking about having a peaceful life and not being under constant threat than it was supporting the Black Lives Matter or BLM movement specifically. However, during that time, and because of what it was, there were several police officers sent out to do several different jobs while under the guise and this absolute concept of white empowerment that was dredged up by the Trump administration, and actually were discussing between each other ways that they could murder more black people dead in the street. Where were they when white guys decided to take they were probably with them. Makes sense, right? So this is something, of course, that we see as a very interesting piece of news. It's nothing new for black people. We didn't just find out yesterday that white people and white police officers want to kill us. It's kind of always been there, and it's always starting to intensify, even though some of our young people are just becoming aware of it. Congratulations on waking up. But this case is definitely something worth watching because the outcome will determine what a blatant, well, actually, maybe not. Two white guys riding up in a police car and shooting a little 12-year-old in Ohio. Didn't get them thrown in jail, so maybe this won't either. So I guess it has nothing to do with watching for justice. What it has to do is with helping us understand and realize this problem is not going away. These people are training their kids. Do you think that 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 white cops that were found out by this black cop and heard these stories and went to his superiors and asked them to do something about it, when they demoted that black cop, after he told them that his white officers and his co-officers were planning to kill black people who were marchers and protesters, and did nothing to those same white police officers. That's nothing new for us, and it won't change anything that the case is there. This is one of the reasons why the top 3 stories right now is not about the Supreme Court designation. It's beautiful to have a black woman sit on the Supreme Court. It is a beautiful image. It is an amazing image. It gives a lot of hope to our young black girls about the power they can establish. But I'll say, like I said, when President Obama was elected, the most that he ever did was when he was first elected. And that is to install the image of black power as a realistic image, not in the minds of Americans per se, but in the minds of the world itself. And an understanding that almost 90% of the population that lives outside the United States understood that black people, and when we show up, they should take us seriously, especially black Americans. So, same thing for the new Supreme Court Justice. I believe that her imagery itself, the optics of the situation, are absolutely necessary and beautiful for the establishment of black power and self-determination. Whether or not her seat actually swings any votes enough, of course she does not have the help of her fellow black justice in Clarence Thomas, who right now, in another piece of news, is actually weighing in on whether or not there's any way to check the Supreme Court justice because of him and his wife's necessity to work with the Trump administration and the telephone calls they had about trying to overthrow the vote so that he could retain power. It's not to say that she would have the kind of power we want. So in this, what I'm kind of emphasizing is let's watch the local news a little more. Let's look to what's happening state by state. And there's no state, listen to me, there's no state to pay attention to more if you are a black American than the state of Georgia. State of Georgia has everything in place to be a really awesome space for African Americans. That's not to say that we won't have to fight, but we're very familiar with fighting. So we're going to fight regardless. Pick your grounds, pick your battleground, pick your fights, and always position yourself in a position to win. As Sun Tzu said, the greatest generals always placed their armies in a position where failure and loss was near impossible. So with that, I'm going to remind you that this is Farouk Hunter. I am your brother, the chairman of the Freedom Nation, and as always, I invite you to join us in building the ideal black town in Hancock County, Georgia. 90% African American, beautiful place where the politics go in our favor. Our population that we're building down there now has the ability to seat some individuals in key positions. Remember, Hancock County was the first county in all of Georgia to ever have a black commissioner. And we can do that again. It doesn't have to be black or white, actually. We need a friendly commissioner, someone who understands. Clarence Thomas is black. So we need a friendly commissioner, someone who understands what it is that we're trying to do for ourselves. Create systems of peace, create systems of prosperity, to rid ourselves of this horrible concept of the black tax, and to rid ourselves of people threatening our children and our prosperity on a daily basis, so that we can have peace of mind and we can grow both locally and internationally. FreedomNation.me. Visit our website and look in, and I'll see you again. This is your brother Farouk Hunter, the voice of freedom. Pay attention. There's things happening and things are changing as long as we stay on the ball.